Hello, my name is Sadie Maley, and I'm an Assurance Associate with Plante Moran, a certified public accounting firm. I've been with Plante Moran for over 8 years, and I have extensive experience in the single audit compliance area. I'm here today to inform you about uniform guidance, some of the basics, and how that relates to TRIO programs that you're all involved with. My experience at Plante Moran has afforded me the opportunity of working with higher education institutions and not-for-profit organizations, specifically in the compliance area, as I mentioned. I've had exposure to TRIO programs in particular, and I've been involved in our firm-wide task force related to uniform guidance, implementation, and ensuring that our engagement teams are performing the right types of audit steps and testing. At the end of today's session, the goal is that you've developed a basic understanding of what uniform guidance is and how it impacts these federally funded programs, including TRIO. We're going to start at a high level and give some background about uniform guidance and the 3 distinct parts of UG, as I'll refer to it, which are administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements. First, we'll give you an introduction to what uniform guidance is. Uniform guidance is contained in Title II of the Code of Federal Regulations, and the full title is Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Audits. It's only 100 pages, so if you need some exciting reading material, you should print it out. Essentially, it houses the federal regulations that are applicable to all nonprofit organizations that receive federal funding. Even though it's contained within one document, it does still allow for disparate treatment depending on what type of entity is receiving federal funding in certain circumstances. For example, there are specific parts that are called out as being applicable to IHEs, or institutions of higher education. For the most part, this guidance became effective starting December 26, 2014. Implementation of the guidance is being spearheaded by the Cross-Agency Council on Financial Assistance Reform, or COFAR, which worked closely with the Office of Management and Budget on its development. The COFAR has been working over the last 2 years with stakeholders to facilitate implementation, evaluate effectiveness, and keep this important reform effort moving forward. The picture on the left is the cover page of the actual Federal Register. A PDF of that version is available online. However, if you're looking for the most recent version of the guidance, you should access the electronic version, or the eCFR, which is publicly available and updated continuously. These are the 3 broad categories of grant guidance that were always in existence, so hopefully they sound familiar if you've been in the grants world for any length of time. The 3 distinct parts of UG are laid out here: administrative requirements, audit requirements, and cost principles. It's important to note that administrative requirements and cost principles apply to all federal programs that are subject to UG. Audit requirements apply only when certain criteria is met. Said another way, if an audit isn't necessary, an organization is still required to comply with the administrative requirements and cost principles that are applicable to the federal funding received. So what does UG look like? There are 6 subparts, which are listed here, Subpart A through Subpart F. Subparts A through D contain the administrative requirements. Subpart E contains cost principles, and Subpart F contains audit requirements. There are also 11 appendices. Overall, not a short document. We're going to introduce some concepts that are key throughout this session today to each of the 3 buckets of uniform guidance. First up is administrative requirements. Contrary to what you might think, administrative requirements start at the federal agency level. The Department of Education is responsible for complying with these requirements when they award and monitor TRIO programs to organizations. As you can tell, they're required to comply with regulations related to notices of funding opportunities. They're required to perform risk-based reviews when awarding funding, and there's a number of other requirements that they're required to comply with. Now we move into the administrative requirements most applicable to non-federal entities, some of which are listed here. At the core of these regulations is the concept of establishing and maintaining an effective internal control environment. This is repeated and emphasized throughout the UG in many sections. You might be wondering, what is an effective internal control environment? Section 200.61 of Uniform Guidance defines internal control as a process implemented by a non-federal entity designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives in the following categories: effectiveness and efficiency of operations, reliability of reporting for internal and external use, and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Taken a step further, Section 200.62 of UG defines internal control over compliance requirements for federal awards as a process implemented by a non-federal entity designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the following objectives for federal awards. Transactions are properly recorded and accounted for. Transactions are executed in compliance. Funds, property, and other assets are safeguarded against loss from unauthorized use or disposition. Really, at the core of it, this is the government's way of making sure that there's the least amount of fraud, waste, and abuse related to federal funding. Here are some common characteristics of a strong internal control environment. That environment would be one that evaluates and monitors compliance, takes prompt action on audit findings, safeguards protected personally identifiable information, in addition to other items. Luckily for those of you implementing strong internal controls, there are control frameworks and additional guidance already established. The Green Book, COSO, and the Office of Management and Budget's Compliance Supplement are accepted resources for organizations to use when setting up and maintaining their internal control environment. Along with the general requirements, there are also some specific requirements that non-federal agencies are required to adhere to. Financial reporting and procurement are two examples of specific administrative requirements outlined in the Uniform Guidance. Entities are required to use OMB-approved forms to fulfill financial reporting obligations. Entities are required to have a written procurement or purchasing policy that includes certain items like the 5 methods of procurement that are listed. As part of the procurement policy requirements, the UG also requires all non-federal entities to maintain written policy standards governing organizational conflicts of interest. We'll talk about specific requirements more in depth later on. The second bucket in UG is the cost principle regulations. These are concepts that fall under the cost principles umbrella. As we move forward, you'll notice that the administrative requirements and cost principles requirements go hand in hand. If implemented correctly, the administrative requirements are designed to ensure compliance with cost principles. The basic premise of allowable is that the grant funds are being spent in accordance with their intended purpose. UG provides a common set of rules for allowable costs across entity types, reinforces the no-profit provision, and clarifies the allowability of certain costs. There is a baseline outlined by UG cost principles, but there are also specific program rules about what types of costs are allowable. For example, the talent search program under TRIO, services and activities that a talent search project must provide include the following: connections for participants to high-quality tutoring services, advice and assistance in secondary school course selection, connections for participants to education or counseling services. These are just some of the program-specific allowable costs for talent search, which are outlined by the compliance supplement. Disallowed cost is the next concept to understand in cost principles. As the term sounds, disallowed costs are the opposite of allowed costs. These are also referred to as unallowable costs. Again, there are certain costs that the federal government has deemed to be unallowable for all federal programs. Examples include purchases of alcoholic beverages or bad debt expense. Certain costs are unallowable with exceptions. Entertainment costs and selling and marketing costs are included in this category. Past the general requirements, there are program-specific requirements as well. For the TRIO programs, all of them are required to exercise caution in reimbursing for the following cost items. These can never be charged to any TRIO program. They include tuition, fees, stipends, and other forms of direct financial support for employees, research not directly related to the evaluation or improvement of the project, except for the research activities of McNair participants, and construction, renovation, and remodeling of any facilities. Direct costs are fairly straightforward. They are costs incurred that are used for the performance of the grant objective, which are not disallowed. Certain administrative costs can be charged as direct costs as long as they meet all of the criteria listed. If administrative costs do not meet this criteria, they can be used in the calculation of indirect costs, which we'll discuss next. Charging indirect costs to a program allows an organization to recover common or joint purpose costs. These are costs that are not directly attributable to the performance of a program, but they do benefit the program indirectly. There are two methods for charging indirect costs. One is a negotiated indirect cost rate. The second method is the de minimis indirect cost rate that is allowed by uniform guidance. The de minimis indirect cost rate available is 10% if organizations meet certain criteria. Any non-federal entity that has a federally negotiated indirect cost rate may apply for a one-time extension of a current negotiated indirect cost rate for a period up to 4 years. This extension will be subject to the review and approval of the cognizant agency for indirect costs, and if an extension is granted, the non-federal entity may not request a rate review until the extension period ends. Uniform guidance allows for one or the other, but not for the use of both of these methods. Another area that is discussed under the cost principles section of UG is time and effort reporting. This includes the salaries and wages of the personnel who are running the grant program. UG outlines requirements for internal controls surrounding time and effort reporting, but does not prescribe specific rules for non-federal entities to follow. It's very important for an organization to understand the overarching requirements and design processes and procedures to comply with them. In section 200.415, OMB sought to assure that expenditures are proper and comply with the award's terms and conditions by requiring the project budgets, annual and final fiscal reports, or vouchers requesting payment under the agreement include a certification signed by an official who is authorized to legally bind the non-federal entity. The certification would state the language that is on the screen. Although this seems very clear-cut, complying with the certification requirements can take coordination and planning, especially in larger organizations where multiple departments may be involved in the requests for reimbursement or annual reporting for a program to ensure that the appropriate language is documenting and the right people are certifying the listed reports. We've given you a taste of the administrative requirements and cost principles so far. As a reminder, even if the third bucket, audit requirements, isn't applicable, all nonprofit organizations that receive federal funding have to comply with the first two buckets, which are the cost principles and the administrative requirements. Subpart F of the UG provides audit requirements. These provisions generally impact which entities federal dollars are required to undergo an audit, to what extent, and also contains some implications in terms of how findings are handled. We'll cover some basic understanding of the audit threshold, major program determination, and other audit-related provisions now. The first threshold that an auditor will evaluate is whether or not a single audit is required. Organizations that have total federal expenditures of over $750,000 in a year would be required to have a single audit. Please make note that this is related to the federal expenditures and not the award amounts. An organization could have an award of $10 million in any given year, and as long as the expenditures related to the award are not over $750,000, they would not be required to have a single audit in that year. Once it's determined that a single audit is required, the auditor then has to determine whether they qualify to be a low-risk auditee. There are specific requirements that an auditor will address to get to that determination. Once that is made, that indicates what level of coverage the audit is required to get, whether it's 20% or 40% based on that determination. And that means the number of dollars of federal expenditures that are tested within the major program testing. Now, once you're subject to a single audit, that doesn't necessarily mean that every single federal program you have or every single federal dollar that you spent is going to be subject to that audit. This is the concept of major program testing that I had mentioned. As part of the planning process, auditors have to evaluate the program expenditures that an organization has to determine which programs will be considered major and be tested in more detail. The UG provides a framework for auditors to determine major programs. Major programs are the programs that the auditor selects to test. It requires a risk-based approach to that selection, and a lot of the times the conclusion is not up to the auditor. If an organization has multiple programs and TRIO is one of them, it may or may not be tested in any given year. Additionally, that determination can change from year to year based on the whole set of facts and circumstances related to federal expenditures of an organization. These are some additional considerations that are made during the major program selection process. Generally, the programs that auditors have identified in the past with issues will potentially be tested more often than programs that haven't identified any issues related to audit testing. As a result of that, pass-through entities no longer need to request audit reports from the non-federal entity. These are some other items of note related to audit requirements. UG provides that audit reports are publicly available on the internet. At the conclusion of an audit, the audit report will be posted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, which is a central repository. Everyone has access to download those audit reports once they're posted. Additionally, UG provides that single audit quality project must be done every 6 years, and that the auditee must attest that protected, personally identifiable information is not included in the report that is posted to the clearinghouse. So far, we've outlined an overview of Uniform Guidance, which is OMB's regulations that drive TRIO program administration compliance. We've hit on the emphasis of a strong internal control environment that is pervasive throughout the administrative requirements and cost principles sections of UG and will be tested through the audit requirements. This broad understanding of Uniform Guidance and the related 3 buckets should be kept in mind during various phases of budget management, which is ongoing through the life of the grant. This concludes Module 1.